typically surface water withdrawals. If the application is complete, that means all the pieces are there and they're technically correct. Typically 6 months for an application to be turned around. For groundwater, it's typically 9 months to a year for us to turn one around. The dilemma is we don't always get the information we need to base a decision on the first time through. We frequently get an application, crack it open, and find pieces missing. So our staff then have to go back to the project sponsor, give them a list of deficiencies, wait for that to come back, and there's this back and forth. But we will not make a decision until we have all of the information. And if we have an incomplete application and it sits there for a sufficient period of time, we'll get back to the project sponsor and suggest that they either complete the application or withdraw.
You might have touched on this before. I know you've talked about this in the past, but if we get a request for a certain amount of daily withdrawal, we typically approve that amount, or is there adjustments made based on certain?
That's a good question, Ken, and there is this perception that the SRBC rubber stamps everything, and we never deny anything. That's the perception. Here's the reality. If you come in as an applicant and you want to withdraw 1 million gallons per day, but our analysis indicates that the best you can withdraw from that location is 500,000, our staff will recommend that you reconsider your request and drop it down to 500,000. If you choose to move forward and stay with 1 million, then it will come to the commissioners and staff will recommend a denial. Usually what happens is if our staff tells the project sponsor that that water simply isn't there, the project sponsor typically reduces their request or they simply withdraw the application. So if you look at how many times staff is recommending denial to the commissioners, it's relatively rare. The reason is staff's trying to work with the applicants, let them know the direction in which staff is going to make a recommendation, and frequently the project sponsor either withdraws their application or they lower the amount of water that they're asking for.
Could you address the question of cumulative impacts? You said that you addressed the issue of cumulative impacts by claiming that cumulative impacts are studied in relation to each water withdrawal, but what we're talking about is cumulative impacts both in terms of all the gas drilling wells, all the water withdrawals, and all the pipelines, all the roads, all the well pad construction, all the air pollution, and also the chemicals that are not disclosed.
Right.
And could I really want to have a dialogue here. How do you study cumulative impacts for a water withdrawal for high volume slickwater hydraulic fracturing with horizontal drilling unless all of the abandoned oil and gas wells from the past have been mapped, and until all the fractures, the pre-existing fractures deep down under the earth that convey the surface, which are responsible for some of the methane migration, until all those fractures have been mapped. So I don't understand the claim that cumulative impacts are studied when none of those things are in place.
Okay. You and I are talking about two different things. When I talk about cumulative impacts, I'm talking about water withdrawals. That's
fractured.
all I'm talking about.
Fragmenting the water withdrawal, so the purpose of the water withdrawal is for, how do you not take responsibility for what the water is going to be used for in terms of these long-term cumulative impacts?
The way our regulations are written, we are concerned about the impact on the aquatic ecosystem of that withdrawal. Well, again, what we're not allowed to do, and what you wouldn't want us to do, is go outside the powers that we are given.
Yes, we do.
Well, we can't.
It's a moral emergency.
We cannot do that.
Where is the billions of gallons of water permanently removed from the basin? Where is the cumulative impact over 20 years? What's the total volume of water that's going to be removed from the basin?
Forever.
What's the amount? Where is the impact study?
Let me try to put that very issue into perspective. The total amount of water that this industry has consumptively used as of September 30th this fall, the total amount of water was 5.6 billion gallons. The total amount, let me finish, the total amount that has been consumptively used was 5.6 billion gallons.
Wait, over what area?
That's since the play began, throughout our entire basin since this play began, which was, listen, let me finish, please. Let me finish this question. Since this play began, which was around the summer of 2008, up until September 30th, 2011, the total amount of consumptive use, 5.6 billion gallons.
And that's okay.
Let me tell you what the average flow from the Susquehanna into the bay is. The average daily flow from the Susquehanna into the bay, 26 billion gallons per day. So if you're looking at the relative impact from a hydrologic perspective, this kind of global perspective, the amount of water that is consumptively used by this industry is very low. That doesn't mean we don't care. That doesn't mean that we're not tracking.
We're only 2.5% into the full development in the South Shore gas drilling, and we're asking for real cumulative impacts, not facts about how tiny it's been so far, and not just quantity. But we're looking at cumulative impacts, including not just the quantity, but the quality of life and the health of our ecosystem and our people, and nothing that you've said has addressed that at all.
Let me tell you one last.
I'd like to thank Dr. Richendorfer for his presentation, and I'd like to call Mr. Dayhoff back to the podium.
We have a couple more questions. We have a couple more questions for him.
Actual dockets.
We have questions for him. We would like to ask him, what is the acceptable amount? At what point will you say no? Okay? What is the point you will say no?
Extraction site, is there a standardized way to report from each site? Because I have seen them paper and penciling the numbers that they are taking out of those water at Halstead, Great Bend. They're paper and penciling.
Let me answer this man's question. The amount of water that can safely be withdrawn is, and one of the slides I had was sustainable yield. That is a calculation that goes back to answer your very question. How much water can safely be withdrawn from any given watershed or sub-watershed? That is part of our analysis.
And what's the number?
What's the number?
It depends on the basin.
On this basin, you're in charge of the Susquehanna Basin. At what point will you say no, too much water is leaving?
What if they say 100 billion this year?
You can't keep taking it, it runs out.
Okay.
It's like fossil fuels.
There's
like replenishing it.
Well,
you
I
can't
will
retake
make
it.
I will make one last statement, and then I've got to defer to my colleagues. These dockets are written for a 4-year period. That's one thing. So if by chance we've made a mistake in the amount of water that we've incorporated in our dockets, let me finish. I've entertained your questions. Let me finish. If we have made a mistake and we find out that our math is wrong or our assumptions are incorrect, this docket lasts 4 years.
What
At the
happens
end
if
of
your
that
error
period,
causes catastrophe?
remember the amount of water
Is
that
there a
has been
chance that your
incorporated.
error could cause catastrophe? Is there a
Ladies and
chance?
gentlemen, we're moving on to the
Is
pending
there a
dockets.
chance that your
Mr.
math error could
Dayhoff,
cause a catastrophe?
you would move on to the pending dockets, please.
Doesn't even
Thank you,
matter
Madam
if
Chair.
they're paper and
As
penciling.
I said earlier, we can reopen any docket at any time. These are the 24 projects pending decision today. There is a booklet available on the table if there are any left, if you care to follow along. As I described these dockets, these applications, I'll refer to 3 of them as ex parte modifications. Those are actions that are initiated by commission staff to address some sort of deficiency or problem with an approval, and we've taken it upon ourselves to take corrective action to that. So there is no application associated with those, just a recommendation for modification that I'll describe.